Sacramento County hiding a much more lucrative.
I get a feeling there's going to be a riot.
I don't read the newspapers because they all have ugly prints.
Check me out.
At the starting of the week, at Summit Talks, you'll hear
Cuts
them
hard
speak.
left
It's
over the
only
curb from the
Monday.
second ADDU car. Now you can see the patrol car right behind the drug suspect, and then he cuts across.
Negotiations breaking down. See those leaders start to frown. It's sword and gun day. Tomorrow never comes until it's too late. Could be sitting, taking lunch. The news will hit you like a punch. It's only Tuesday.
What time is it?
You never thought we'd go to war after all the things we saw. It's April Fool's Day.
What time is it?
Tomorrow never comes until it's too late. Tomorrow never comes until it's too late.
Tomorrow is another day. Today is another bomb. 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 Escalation, devastation, generation, separation, situation, dissipation, shot. Another shot, the tender vessel crushing, pop the heart is cold, the gun is hot, shot. I'm not sure if they done or not, I'm not sure that they wanna stop, the gun is cold, the blood is hot, shot. The hearts are weak, the guns are not.
Hear a whistling overhead. Are you alive or are you dead? It's only Thursday.
What time is it?
You feel the shaking of the ground. A billion candles burn around. Is it your birthday?
What time is it?
Tomorrow never
Get some more on the phone.
comes too late.
Trying to reach some more. Get some more on the phone.
Tomorrow never
I
comes
need to see more.
too late.
Trying to reach some more.
Think tomorrow's come, I think it's too late.
Another day. Tomorrow is another day. Tomorrow is another day.
Why be a servant to the law when you can be its master?
Hi, I'm Liam Walker. Today I'm going to talk to you about drugs and organized crime. You're probably asking yourself, Liam, how do drugs and organized crime relate? Well, let's start off with the basics. Organized crime has been around longer than you or I or any living human have been on this earth. It affects all countries and all walks of life, comes from every nationality, and has a major effect on every economy. The most fruitful product in all of organized crime is by far narcotics. And just how fruitful is that product, you might ask? Well, recently the UN released a statement saying that in 2003, the organized crime drug trade reined in a whopping $321.6 billion US.
Shit just got real.
Crime organizations deal with all types of drugs. The most common ones being cannabis, opiates, cocaine, and various types of amphetamines.
An estimated 200 million people around the world are drug users, and of those up to 40 million are considered to be dependent or drug addicts. By far the most common drug is cannabis, which is consumed by 4 out of 5 users. It is followed by amphetamine-type stimulants like ecstasy or opiates, particularly heroin and opium, and cocaine. Every drug has its own specific system of production, trafficking and distribution. Cannabis, for example, is most often locally produced, meaning international traffic is limited. Even so, the biggest producing countries are Morocco, which exports cannabis into Europe, and Afghanistan. Amphetamines are mostly produced in illegal laboratories in the countries where they are consumed, particularly in Europe and North America. But it is a different story for heroin. Afghanistan, and to a lesser extent Myanmar, are the main producers of the opium poppy, the basic source of heroin. The drug is transported to Russia or into Europe via Turkey and the Balkans, and reaches North America via Africa or Southeast Asia. Cocaine is produced from coca leaves, which grow abundantly in Bolivia, Colombia and Peru, and although the area under cultivation is on the wane, it still generates massive worldwide traffic, through Mexico to North America and into Europe via the Caribbean and Africa. Drug traffickers launder an estimated $1,600 billion a year, almost 3% of global GDP, making the traffic far and away the most lucrative trade for organised crime networks.
Now that I've told you a bit about organized crime and its involvement in trafficking and sale of drugs across the world, I would like to turn the rest of the video over to the interview that I set up with,
You're blowing it, man!
that my colleague Michael Sullivan and I set up. So, Mr. Kruger, of course, me and Michael know you, but I was wondering if you could introduce yourself to the kids of the class and what your profession is.
I'm Terry Kruger. I've been a police officer with the city of Portland for 25 years.
All right, and what does that profession involve, just in a rough, approximate?
Law enforcement.
Yeah, all right.
How long have you
but as far as my career, I've been there for 25 years. My dad was a Portland policeman for 29 years. My brother was for 28 years. My sister-in-law for 27 years, and my mom was a nurse in the county booking jail for about 10 and a half years. I served 20 years on our SWAT team as a sniper, explosive breacher, as the assistant element leader for the sniper unit, as the sergeant, and as the team leader. Now a lieutenant with the Portland Police Bureau, in charge of Central Precinct, Morning Relief. I have 4 separate units, 9 sergeants, about 60 police officers now.
And how much of your profession would you say can be traced back to organized crime? So like, I guess gang-related crime, drug smuggling, stuff like that.
Mafias or anything like that?
Well, as far as the profession as a whole, that one's tough to say. I mean, you know, we've always had law enforcement. Society requires a law enforcement component. Without law enforcement, can you imagine, for example, if all law enforcement in the nation were to take 6 months off and everybody knew it? It would get ugly, and it would get ugly fast. And I don't think the general public realizes, you know, how many people out there that are willing to commit violent acts to get what they want. So law enforcement component keeps the lid on that and allows us all to live in safety and not even necessarily have to lock our doors in a community like West Lynn. You know, organized crime got started early on. It came all the way from Europe. It came over here, and it's still going strong in this country and across the world. There's a lot of money involved. They do a pretty good job of laundering their money through legitimate business, and then committing, you know, crimes or having organized crime behind the scenes that really make the money for them, but they're able to hide that money. They're into most every aspect that you can think of, whether it's drugs, prostitution, major theft, as far as I mean, you name it. I mean, they're involved in it. So.
Yeah, what nationalities influence the crime scene in Portland? I mean, is there any specific race that you?
We're pretty broad. We're equal opportunity criminals. So, Portland has pretty much everything.
And whose international influence is the largest? I mean, this can be just for the U.S. in general.
You know, I couldn't answer that. I can tell you that to some extent there is crime. You can look at the types of crime and generalize nationalities. We have a lot of Russian car thieves and rings where they break the cars down into pieces and sell off the components, but they're also involved in drugs and a lot in prostitution. You can look at the Hispanic community, they're predominantly drugs. You can look at the African American community, they're drugs and a lot of violent crime from gangs. Hispanics have a large gang influence, Asians have a large gang influence, almost all the gangs center around narcotics.
So the follow-up question to that would be, how many of your arrests approximately are connected to narcotics?
A huge number.
Yeah.
Yes, a huge number, and it'd be tough to put a percentage on it, but better than half, probably closer to 70%, are tied to drugs in some way. That even if your criminal offenders aren't involved in the drug trade themselves, they're usually high, or trying to get money to buy drugs, or they're trying to rip off a drug dealer. A lot of the crime that we see is criminal on criminal crime. There really isn't. If they were able to break it down, it would be tough to do statistically, but if they were able to break crime down and say how much crime is committed against innocent people who are uninvolved in criminal activity when the crime occurs against them, other than thefts, the number would be very low.
All right, and could you give us a brief list of some of the gangs that are related to those narcotics? They can be major or minor, it doesn't really matter.
Within the Portland area, is it just more?
Yeah, I'm not a gang aficionado. We have subject matter experts that can sit here and give you a huge list of gangs.
Yeah.
But, pretty much any gang that you've heard of is here in Portland represented at some level, from outlaw bikers who are organized crime to, Hispanic gangs like 13 Streeters, to the Bloods, to the Crips, to the Asian gangs. We have them all, not to mention, the actual mafia.
And which ones of those that you listed is most troubling? I mean, would you say that most of them, they're pretty spread evenly?
Troubling in what way? So as far as violent crime, it
Yeah.
tends to be, the Hispanic, Black, and Asian gangs.
Mm-hmm.
They're really at a lower level in the drug trade here in Portland than some might think, because you got to look at the way that those gangs originate. You become a member of a gang because you come from, more often than not, a screwed up, broken home, and you're usually live in inner city. You usually are relatively poor. You're lacking self-esteem. School's not important to you. No one around you thinks school's important to you. You don't have any parental guidance, and they're not out there giving you good advice. You're looking for a place to belong, somebody to belong with. You're looking for some sort of status. You're looking for money. You're looking for something that isn't boring and isn't involved with school, because you're lacking in any desire for education. And so you start hanging with these kids, and that's how they get inducted into the gangs. Drugs are a portion of that. It's where they get some of their money. It's how they have some of their fun. And then the crime goes from there. And a lot of the crime that occurs is actually more related to somebody disrespecting somebody else, somebody's girlfriend. Sometimes it's just an initiation piece. Other times it's drug related.
And how much of the just kind of activity in Portland has been affected? Like, is illegal immigration, obviously it's not much of a problem, as much of a problem as other places in the U.S. because of just distance, but I mean, has it definitely shown effect in the crime?
Well, you say that, but that's, we have a much greater problem with that than, say, Kansas or North Dakota.
Yeah.
We have the I-5 corridor comes straight up from Mexico. And so we do have more than our fair share up here. Mm-hmm. One of the big problems that we've had, and I've been involved in a number of these takedowns, is we get these illegal drug cartels out of Mexico that bring illegals up here into the country and then enslave them to work in large marijuana grows on public lands. And they put these guys out there on Forest Service lands and BLM lands in very remote areas, and have them plant and cultivate marijuana crops, large crops, thousands and thousands of plants. And they live out there with the crops, they arm them, and they tell them to defend those crops with their lives. Otherwise, they will kill their family members back in Mexico. They don't realize that when they were being brought here into the country free, that's exactly how bad it's going to be, but that's how bad it gets. and then they literally bring them supplies and drop supplies, and they live up there with those crops. So that's definitely a problem, and the Mexican drug cartels are responsible for a lot of the drugs that we have up here. The heroin trade is almost predominantly Hispanic in this country, and in Portland especially. And obviously there's a lot of cocaine, and then we've put great pressures to reduce methamphetamines in this state, and we've done a good job. And so now methamphetamine production, a lot of it switched to Mexico, where they don't have as much control as we do. And so we're getting a lot of methamphetamine come up into the Portland market from Mexico.
But has there been any, have you had, or the police department in general, has any contact with international gangs, kind of like the Mexican mafia, any?
Distinct, or is it just kind of like, you know, they're linked and then the more national guys get involved with the actual kind of giant organizations?
Right, that's how that works. So let's say we develop probable cause for somebody that we believe is tied into something that's international or on a national level, even out of state, then we're going to refer that and work with our partners, law enforcement partners. So essentially they'll take over the investigation because they're the ones that have jurisdiction.
And I would assume these people became an influence in Portland basically just ever since immigration's been around. I mean, for as long as, just dating back. Just the races that were first here and would start gangs here.
As far as organized crime?
Yeah, just gangs and stuff like that.
Well, you know, they're everywhere.
Yeah.
Right? And,
yeah.
And the origination of the gangs depends upon which gang you're talking about. Every gang's originated completely on its own. It's got its own separate history. It came out of a completely different region, country, culture. So it's very individual.
Overall, would you say that these gangs and these groups and such are on the rise or the fall? I know that you're, again, involved in the police department, but just from a standpoint there, I don't know if...
You know, organized crime reached a very powerful level in this country a long time ago. It got knocked back pretty hard, but we weren't able to do away with it. It's still strong in every facet from every culture. They still have their organized crime because of the money involved. And I don't think that we're ever going to get rid of it. How big, how strong, whether it's bigger now or stronger now than it was, I can't tell you.
And then just the last question to kind of wrap things up. We're going to be showing this interview to a class of juniors and seniors in high school. Is there anything that you would like to add, relevant or not, to the questions today?
It doesn't have much to do with organized crime, but you know, a lot of people are pushing for legalizing drugs, and they think that that would be a solution to the financial problems of 1, housing criminals, 2, taxation, 3, all the money that law enforcement spends to combat drugs. I can tell you from an insider's perspective that it would actually be a bad idea to legalize drugs. And the reason it would be bad, I mean, people first of all want to start with marijuana. Well, let's not try to fix something that isn't broken. Do you want your kids smoking a ton of weed when they grow up? The kids that you know that smoke a ton of weed, are they doing really well? Are they getting great grades? Are they, you know, that's the rarity. Most of the kids that are smoking a lot of weed start failing in school. They don't give much crap. Their whole social lives begin to center around drug use. You know, you don't just go to a movie, you get stoned and go to a movie. You don't just go to the drive-thru, you get stoned and go to the drive-thru. You don't just go hang out at somebody's house, you get stoned and hang out at somebody's house. So why would you open those floodgates? Already in Oregon, it's decriminalized. So there's some deterrent, but it's a traffic ticket up to 28 grams unless it's individually packaged. That's a whole lot of weed to be hanging on your person if you're just using anyway. And you start to open, people say, well, it's not a gateway drug. Really? I don't know how many people just start with heroin, for example. I don't know how many people that just start with methamphetamine. They don't. So to say it's not a gateway drug is just naive, and you're in denial. So what it does is it opens the doors. People do drugs, why? Because the drugs make you feel good. That's why people do drugs, and they're very effective at it. Weed makes you feel great, and guess what? You wake up in the morning, you didn't lose your job, your mom and dad aren't pissed at you, you didn't get thrown out of school, you got away with it, it was just fine. All of a sudden you're smoking weed all the time. You get an opportunity, you're hanging with a different type of people. When you start doing it all the time, all your friends start to center around drugs. You don't have many friends that you pal around with that aren't using drugs, do you? And so then you're hanging with kids that use drugs, which exposes you to other drugs, because that's the culture that you're becoming part of. So whether you're going to do the next one or not, it's going to be completely up to you. But if you didn't have bad experiences with weed, why not try coke? And you try coke 5, 6, 10, 12 times, man, that makes you feel great. Nothing bad happened there either. Somebody offers you something else. So it is a gateway drug. Legalizing drugs is not the answer, and it would not provide greater taxation. For example, marijuana. You can grow weed. Everybody can grow weed. So how are you going to tax that? You know, we don't enforce it hardly as it is. If you've got a grow card right now, SWAT team's not coming doing search warrants at your house, even if you're growing twice the number of plants your card allows. So that's where I'd like to go. Legalizing drugs is not the answer. Decriminalization of marijuana like we have it in Oregon, I think, is reasonable. Keeps kids from, you know, destroying their lives if they get caught, but it provides some deterrent. And nobody should be messing with meth, coke, heroin, and I think we can all be in agreement with that.
That's all I have to say about that.
That's good. Well, thanks so much for your insight today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
You bet.